Okay, so we are on our last lesson for this module because we are going to be comparing fractions. The last two lessons you have compared fractions, but they've been with the same numerator. We are going to work on comparing fractions with the same numerator, but we're also going to compare fractions with the same denominator, and we're also going to compare some fractions that don't have the same numerator or the same denominator. So lots of comparing different fractions for this lesson. We are going to do some concept development together first before we move on to the sheets for this lesson. When they've got the same denominator, it's very easy to compare the fractions because they have the same number of parts. So on your paper, I want you to go ahead and write what you see. You do not have to write same denominator. I was just putting the topic up there, but I do want you to write 1/4, 3/4, 2/5, 4/5, and 5/8 and 1/8. And I do want you to leave room underneath them. Well, let me just go ahead and do this. I do want you to draw two rectangles, same size, under each pair of fractions because we are going to draw to see how it is very easy to compare fractions that have the same denominator. So leave room to make your two rectangles under each one of these as well. So go ahead and get all this written down on your paper, and once you have that down, you can push play. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go completely down with our lines. Since both of these have to be into force, we're just going to go completely down. We're just going to make each one have force. So that way, since they both have force and we go completely down, even if you're off a little bit on your parts, they're both going to be off a little bit. So it's going to be a lot easier to tell if it's one's bigger or one's great or one's less than the other. So then we're going to come over here and we're going to do the same thing with fifths, and we're going to make each one have 5 equal parts. So just coming straight down with our lines to make them have 5 parts. And we're going to do the same thing with eighths, coming straight down and making these rectangles have 8 equal parts. So that way all we will have to do when we're done is to go and shade the parts to see what is bigger than the other. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to have to move mine over a little bit to make another eighth. Okay. So eventually, whenever you get to fractions that have the same denominator, you really should not have to draw anything. All you have to do is look at the numerator to see which numerator is bigger. But like I said, for this one, we are going to draw and shade. So we've got 1/4. I want you to do this on your paper as I'm doing mine. And then you've got 3/4. So all we have to do is we're looking at the one that has more shaded. And you can definitely tell that 3 parts is more than 1 part shaded. So that definitely tells us that 3/4 is the bigger fraction and 1/4 is not the bigger fraction. So when they have the same denominator, all you have to do is look at the numerator and see which one is bigger or which one is more. And I know that's a little bit different than the ones that have the same numerator, because when the fractions have the same numerator, then you're looking at the denominator, and we've talked about if it's a bigger denominator, that's the smaller the part. So this is kind of like the complete opposite, so make sure you're not getting those confused. So what I want you to do is I want you to do 2/5 and 4/5 and 5/8 and 1/8, shade them in, see which one is bigger, and compare the fractions by making the correct symbol in the circle. So go ahead and do these two, and whenever you're done, you can push play. Okay, so 2/5 and 4/5. 4/5 is definitely more. 4/5 has more shaded, and then 5/8 and 1/8. 5/8 is definitely more because 5/8 has more shaded than just 1/8. Okay, so we're going to also be doing same denominator using a number line. So since we've got 3/6 and 5/6, we don't need to draw two different number lines for this, because if we draw one number line, then you will see 3/6 on that number line and 5/6 on that number line. So what you're going to do on your paper is you're going to write 3/6 and 5/6, but you're also going to draw one number line it needs to be divided into 6 equal parts since the denominator on these fractions is 6. So if you start at 0 and then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm going to make my line just a little bit longer so that way my parts are more equal. If you need to do that on yours, definitely do it, but you want to get equal parts, or try your best to get as equal as it can be. Don't forget that you definitely have to label 0 and 1 whole, since we're just working with 1 whole because these fractions are not more than 1 whole. So what I want you to do on your number line is I want you to find where 3/6 is, and I want you to find where 5/6 is, and I want you to write those two fractions on the number line and then push play once you have that done. Okay, so 3/6 was right here, and 5/6 was right here. So when we're comparing fractions on a number line, you just see which one is closer to 1 whole. And the one that's closer to 1 whole is definitely the larger fraction. Or if you were going from 1 whole to 2 wholes, you would see which one was closer to 2, and that one would be the larger fraction. So the one that's pretty much further down the number line and closer to the whole number is going to be your larger fraction. So you can see that 5/6 is closer to 1 whole than 3/6 is. So that tells us that 5/6 is more than 3/6. And like I said, when you have the same denominator, all you got to do is look at the numerator. The bigger the number, the bigger the fraction is going to be. So definitely 5/6 is more than 3/6. Okay, so now we have different denominators and different numerators. Okay, I am looking at these three fractions, and I do notice that 2 of them have 1/2. And I've told you before, when you're comparing something to 1/2, it's equal to 1/2 if the numerator is half of what the denominator is. So anytime the numerator is more than what the denominator is, or I really wouldn't say that. Anytime the numerator is more than half of what the denominator is, it's going to be more than 1/2. Anytime the numerator is less than half of the denominator, it's going to be less than 1/2. So let's just take a look at 1/2 and 5/6. You know that you can always cross multiply, and if I were to cross multiply these, the number that was bigger, that would be the bigger fraction. But I want to take a look at 1/2 and 5/6 with you. 5/6. If I am looking at 6, I know that 3 is half of 6 and 5 is more than 3. So this tells me that really 5/6 is more than 1/2. But to double check our answer and cross multiply to see if we're correct, we know that 6 times 1 is 6, and we know that 2 times 5 is 10. So that tells us right now that after I've cross multiplied, that 5/6, and we want to take away this anytime you're doing this, is more than 1/2. And anytime you cross multiply, you don't necessarily have to draw those lines to make that X. I know that you can think of a line that was actually there and it could be invisible and you can still cross multiply. But anytime you cross multiply, definitely take away those lines if you're doing it on actual paper, so that way you can actually put in the symbol that's greater than or less than. So anytime there's different denominators and different numerators, it's always going to be best to cross multiply to see which one is correct, but I'm hoping that sometimes, especially when you're comparing it to 1/2, that you know. So write these other two on your paper. I'm hoping that with this one right here, you know the answer without cross multiplying based on what this fraction is and what this fraction is. Hoping, crossing my fingers, that you know. So go ahead and write these two, compare them. You can cross multiply on this one if you need to, and then push play once you have it done to check your answers. Okay, so 2/3 was more than 1/6. If I were to cross multiply, 3 times 1 is 3 and 6 times 2 is 12, so that tells me that 2/3 is more. 3/3 over here is equal to 1 whole, and 1/2 is definitely not equal to 1 whole. So that tells me that 3/3 is more, and I hope that you knew that without having to cross multiply. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the sheets that I gave you. It's a front and a back sheet. This side is just working with the number lines, and just like I showed you, the one that is closer to 1/2 is going to be the fraction that is more. So this one is working with more than one number line, but that's okay, because let's say we were comparing 1/3 and we were comparing 2/4. Just because they're not on the same number line, you can look at 1/3 and you can look at 2/4, and I can see that 2/4 is closer to 1/2 than 1/3 is. So that would tell me that 2/4 was actually more than 1/3. So it doesn't have to be on the exact same number line to compare them. You can look at different number lines like they have here. So that's what we're going to do for these. We're going to look at these fractions, and we're going to use the number lines above to help us compare them. So let's look at 1/8 and 3/4. So 1/8 is right here, and then we have to go to the number line with 3/4, and 3/4 is all the way over here. So you can definitely tell that 3/4 using this number line is a lot closer to 1/2 than 1/8 is. So that tells us that 3/4 is a bigger fraction than 1/8 is going to be. Now on these, we're not going to have to cross multiply because we've got the number lines to help us. If the number lines weren't there, or if you had to draw the number lines, I would suggest that you cross multiply to double check your answer to see if it was correct, because sometimes you can't get your parts drawn equally like this picture does. But since the number line is there for you, there's no need to cross multiply because you're just going to use the number line to help you. So all you have to do, find the two fractions that they're giving you, find the one that is closer to 1/2 because that's going to be the bigger fraction, and compare them. So I'm going to have you go ahead and do 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and compare those, and once you have those done, you may push play. Okay, so here's 2/4 and here's 3/6. Since these two fractions are at the same place on the number lines, they're both the same distance away from 1/2. So that tells us that these two fractions are equal. If they're at the same place, then they're going to be equal. And we did that back when we were doing equivalent fractions. 7/8 and 5/8. This is one I've talked about before. If it has the same denominator, the only way they can be equal is if they're the exact same fraction. So they're not equal on these, and you know that 7/8 right here is definitely closer to 1/2 than 5/8 is. So that tells us that 7/8 is more than 5/8. Now we've got 2/3 and 3/8. Okay, so 2/3 is right here, and going down to the eighths, 3/8 is right here. So you can see that 2/3 is closer to 1/2 than 3/8 is. So that tells us that 2/3 is more than 3/8. Then we've got 1/2 and 2/6. Hopefully you knew that 2/6 was further behind than 1/2, because 3/6 would be the same thing as 1/2. And you'd have to have a bigger fraction than that for it to be more than 1/2. So when you look up here at 1/2 and then you look at 2/6, you can definitely see that 1/2 is closer to 1/2 than 2/6 is. So that tells us that 1/2 is greater than 2/6. Hopefully on this one you didn't even have to use the number line and you knew that they are equal. 1/1 is not even up here. There's no number line that just has one part. But you do know that 1/1 is equal to 1/2, and that 3/3 is equal to 1/2, and that those two fractions would be equal. Okay, so down here on the bottom it says use cross multiplying to compare the following fractions. You can cross multiply the following fractions if you would like, or I'm going to let you use the number lines to help you. If the number lines are up there, I think that's a much easier strategy because you don't have to take that step of cross multiplying. So go ahead and compare 7, 8, 9, and 10. Use those number lines at the top. See which ones are closer to 1/2. And once you have these answers done, you may push play to check yours. Okay, so we've got 1/3 and 1/6. Here's 1/3 and here's 1/6. So you can see that 1/3 is closer to 1/2 than 1/6 would be. So that tells us that 1/3 is greater than 1/6. We've got 4/4 and 1/2. Hopefully you knew this one without looking. 1/2 is in the middle of that line. 4/4 is not on here, but if we went to the fourths number line, you do know that 4/4 would be right there where that 1 is. So that definitely tells us that 4/4 is more than 1/2, and I hope that you knew that without even looking. 2/8 and 1/4. So when we go up here, here's 1/4 and here's 2/8. They're at the exact same spot on the number line, so that also tells us that those two fractions are equal. And then we've got 1/3 and 1/6. Those are same numerator, okay? So if it has the same numerator, you look at the denominator. 3 is a smaller denominator, so that's going to have more parts, or I wouldn't say more parts, it's not going to have more parts. It's going to have bigger parts than the 6th is. So without even looking at the number line, I hope that you knew that 1/3 was more than 1/6 because it had the same numerator. Oh look, that's the exact same fraction. 7 and 10 is the exact same fraction. Don't know why they did that, but same numerator. Remember, you look at the denominator. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the parts are going to be. Okay, moving on to the next side of the sheet. It says use any strategy to solve the following problems. Okay, so I would definitely look to see if they have the same numerator or the same denominator. If they have the same numerator or if they have the same denominator, use those strategies that we've done before. If they don't have the same numerator or the same denominator, then you can most definitely cross multiply. So for example, this 3/4 and this 2/8. We can cross multiply these to see which fraction is more. But when we get over here to 2/2 and 6/6, I'm hoping you can look at that and automatically know what the answer would be. So for 3/4 and 2/8, if I were to cross multiply and do 8 times 3, I know that 8 times 3 is 24. If I were to cross multiply and do 4 times 2, I know 4 times 2 is 8. So definitely over here, 3/4 is more than 2/8. Okay, so I'm going to have you go ahead and do 2, 3, and 4. Cross multiply if you need to. Hopefully for number 2, you are not going to cross multiply. Number 3 and 4, I can see where you would need to, but number 2, I'm hoping you don't have to. So go ahead and do 2, 3, and 4 and push play when you're ready to check your answer. Okay, 2/2 is equal to 1/2, 6/6 is equal to 1/2. I am hoping that you put that these were equal fractions. Okay, over here, 4/8, 3/6. If you're not drawing a picture to know for sure, definitely cross multiply for this one. 6 times 4 is 24, and 8 times 3 is 24. So that tells us that those two fractions are equal to one another. We've got 1/8 and 2/3. If I am picturing in my mind right now one circle divided into 8 parts and I only shaded 1, and then I'm picturing another circle divided into 3 parts and I shaded 2, that definitely tells me 2/3 is more. And if you were to cross multiply, 3 times 1 is 3, 8 times 2 is 16. So cross multiplying tells you that yes, that is correct. But a picture drawn for this one would definitely been an easy one to tell what was more and what was less. Now these two right here, not these two, these 4 actually do have a common numerator or a common denominator. So there should be no cross multiplying that's done on these because it's either going to have the same numerator or it's going to have the same denominator. So these two right here have the same denominator. Remember, we've talked about if it has the same denominator, it has the same number of parts. So you just have to see which one is going to have more shaded. These two down here have the same numerator. So since they have the same numerator, all you have to do is look at the denominator. Remember, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the parts are going to be. So think of that in your head. Think about which one's going to have more shaded. So I do want you to do 5, 6, 7, and 8. No cross multiplying with these. Use the strategies that you've learned for same numerator and same denominator, and use that to solve these problems. Once you have them done, I want you to push play so you can check your answer. Okay, so 2/6 and 6/6. Well, without even knowing that it's the same denominator, 6/6 is equal to 1 whole. And we know that 2/6 is not equal to 1 whole. So that's one thing that tells us that 6/6 is more. But if you were to draw these, they both would have 6 parts, and you definitely are going to have a bigger fraction when you're shading all 6 parts instead of 2 parts. So that tells us that 2/6 is less than 6/6. 3/4 and 1/4. Well, they both have the same parts. If I shade 3 parts and then if I shade 1 part, 3 part shaded, 3 part shaded is definitely more than 1 part shaded. So 3/4 is greater than 1/4. Okay, so with the same numerator, if I have a whole circle divided into 4 parts and I shaded 2, and if I have a whole circle divided into 8 parts and I shaded 2, the circle that was divided into 8 parts has a lot smaller parts than the 4ths does. And so 2/4 definitely has more shaded than 2/8. And then we've got 1/2 and 1/3. We've done lots of fractions like this, and we definitely know that the fraction divided into halves is more than the fraction divided into thirds, so 1/2 is more than 1/3. Moving on to number 9 and 10, it's a word problem. Number 9 says Baxby and Lindsay each ate a chocolate bar. Lindsay eats 4/8 of her chocolate, and Baxby eats 2/8 pieces. Write a comparison statement using greater than, less than, or equal to. So all that's saying is it wants you to write 4/8, and it wants you to write 2/8, and it wants you to put one of those symbols in between. Okay, so this one right here, same denominator, so this one is not tricky at all. You just have to think which one is going to have more shaded to know who ate more of the chocolate bar. So go ahead and write the correct symbol in between here and push play once you have that done so you can check your answer. Okay, so 4/8 is definitely more than 2/8. 4/8 shaded is more than 2/8 shaded. Okay, number 10, it says Seamus ate 4/6 of the cake and Lena ate 1/6 of it. How much more of the cake did Seamus eat? Draw a picture to prove it. Okay, so this is not saying compare 4/6 and 1/6. It's saying how much more did Seamus eat? So this one right here, you actually do have to have a picture. So what I want you to do is I want you to draw your 2 rectangles. That one was a little long. Okay. Draw 2 rectangles. We're working with 4/6 and 1/6, so both of these are going to have to be divided into 6 parts. The way I'm going to divide it into 6 parts is I'm going to draw it into thirds first. It's a lot easier to divide it into thirds and then divide it into 6 because you just have to make each part have 2 parts. So we just draw a line right down the middle for the thirds, and then that gives us 6 equal parts. So now make sure both of your rectangles have 6 equal parts. We're going to shade 4/6 for one of them, for what Seamus ate, and then we're going to shade 1/6 for what Lena ate. Okay, so we both know that they ate one part that was exactly the same because these parts are shaded. But how many more parts are shaded for Seamus than for Lena? Because that's going to tell us the answer of how much more did Seamus eat than Lena ate. So we both know that they did eat one piece that was the same, but over here there are 3 other parts that are shaded that Seamus ate that Lena did not. So what fraction is the answer for how much more he ate? Don't put just a number. I want you to put a fraction for how much more he ate. So write the fraction next to this for what fraction tells how much more he ate than Lena ate. Once you have that down, you can push play. Well, since there are 3 more parts shaded that Seamus ate, and there are 6 pieces total, so that tells us that he ate 3/6 more than Lena ate. And that's the correct answer for that one. Okay, so this is the exit ticket for this lesson. Once you have this completed, you may bring it to me so we can go over it together.